The Dachau Massacre, April 29th, 1945. Sunday morning, the air in Germany was so cold it stung the lungs. The men of the U.S. 45th Infantry, the Thunderbirds, thought they were closing in on a simple supply depot. They were farm boys from Oklahoma, factory workers from the Midwest. They were the good guys. But in 30 minutes, these good guys would do something that the U.S. Army would try to erase from history for decades. They were about to walk into the nightmare of the century. And before the sun went down, the Geneva Convention would be dead, and the liberators would become executioners. It started with a smell, not the smell of gunpowder or diesel, but something sweet, heavy, and rotting. Then they saw it. A train, 39 cattle cars sitting silent on the tracks. A young lieutenant climbed up to look inside. He didn't call for backup. He didn't report a find. He just screamed. Inside weren't supplies. They were humans, thousands of them. Men, women, and children, stacked like cordwood. But here is the detail the history books usually leave out. Some of the bodies had bite marks. The living had tried to eat the dead just to last one more hour. These American soldiers were veterans. They thought they were numb. But looking into those boxcars, something inside the American soul broke. When the Thunderbirds reached the gates of Dachau, they weren't looking to liberate anymore. They were looking for blood. Out walked SS Lieutenant Heinrich Wicker. He was wearing a pristine, pressed uniform. He'd polished his boots. He held a white flag, expecting a salute, a formal surrender, and a warm meal. He looked at the Americans and began his speech. An American officer didn't let him finish. He looked at the well-fed Nazi, then at the skeletal remains behind him, and spat directly in the German's face. In the coal yard, 50 SS guards were lined up. They were terrified. They shouted the magic phrase they thought would save them. Asterisk Hitler kaput. Hitler is finished. Asterisk, they waited for the Americans to take them prisoner. They didn't see a rescue team. They saw Lieutenant Jack Bushyhead. He didn't say a word. He just glanced at his machine gunner, a man nicknamed Birdeye. 10 seconds. That's all it took. The sustained roar of a machine gun tore through the coal yard. When the smoke cleared, the snow was no longer white. It was black with coal dust and deep, pulsing red. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks came sprinting toward the noise. He found his men firing into the piles of twitching bodies. He screamed for them to stop. He fired his own pistol into the air. To get their attention, he grabbed a gunner, ready to court-martial him on the spot. But the soldier looked at Hemi's blank, face wet with tears unsobbed. Asterisk, Colonel. They deserved it. Asterisk. And it wasn't just the Americans. The soldiers did something perhaps even more controversial. They stepped aside. They watched as the starving prisoners dragged SS guards from the towers and beat them to death with shovels. The Americans just stood there and smoked. This should have been the end of their careers. An official investigation was launched. Photos were seized. A report titled "The Ill Treatment of German Guards" was slammed onto the desk of General George S. Patton. Patton was a man who famously slapped a soldier for shell shock. He was a man of the rules. The investigator told him, "Asterisk, sir. This is evidence of war crimes committed by Americans." Asterisk. Do you know what Patton did? He looked at the photos of the death train. He looked at the piles of ash in the crematoriums. Then, he picked up the report and did the unthinkable. Burnt Italiano. Or buried it so deep in the archives it took decades to resurface. Patton's verdict. Asterisk. The SS Scout. What they deserved, dismissed. Asterisk history is usually written in black and white. Good guys versus bad guys. But on April 29th, the line vanished. Jack Bushyhead went home to Oklahoma and never spoke a word of that day until he died. Today, there is a memorial at Dachau for the 30,000 victims, but for the men executed against the wall, nothing. They remain in unmarked graves, erased from the world they tried to destroy. It leaves us with a question that haunts every combat veteran. If you had walked past that train, if you had smelled that air, Would you have been a soldier, or would you have pulled the trigger? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments. Was this justice, or was it a war crime? And if you want to see how the Ghost Army used inflatable tanks to trick the Nazis, click the video on your screen. Thanks for watching.